And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 141. At least I hope we've started now. Oh dear, my apologies. I think Microsoft had done another major update and, suddenly I wasn't connecting. The microphone was going, making my voice high and squeaky. So anyway, I hope we're all here now. I see there's a few comments. If you are here, yes, please do leave me a comment. Let me know you're still here, because the viewer counter seems to reckon that half the people have left. So hopefully we can make it restart. So yes, here we are, episode 141, I hope. Yes, leave me a comment. Let me know you're here. Do let me know you're here, please. So today we're going to be giving feedback on the 3 different photos. I have photos put in by Robert and Sandra. Was it Sandra? Yes, it was Sandra. Yes. I'm afraid half my it might be, yes, there might be a little bit of kind of rushing back and forth and trying to click and find bits and pieces, because I haven't quite had the chance to set everything up in the way that I wanted to set it up, because everything was busy going wrong. You would have thought that after 141 episodes I may well have actually got the hang of all this, and yet still the technology manages to trip me up. Anyway, let's see. We have people here. We have people who left comments. Whether they're still here or not, it's a different matter. Anyway, Rosemary said, good morning from the Pacific Northwest, USA. Hope everyone is doing well. April said, hello everyone from Long Island, New York. John said, good morning from Columbus, Ohio. And Robert said, howdy all from Texas. So we have the American contingent in with us. Maggie says, hello from Southwest Scotland. Sandra says, hello everyone from sunny Birmingham. Mr. Mackey says, afternoon, UPwKA and chat. UPwKA? Mr. Mackey? Is that Cormac? Roy says, hello everyone from West Yorkshire. And then Meg says, hello everyone. Okay, Rosemary says, please tell Kim we're okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, thumbs back up, and everybody's saying yay. So, well, not everybody. April's saying yay and still here. Right, okay, looks like I've got people coming back up as well. Although I'd always have a thing saying YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience buffering. So clearly the connection isn't as strong as I would have liked either. So my apologies about that. Really not sure quite what to do about this. I can't really, there's nothing else. I've kind of stripped off all the operations that seem to be happening, so I don't know why the connection isn't there either. Anyway, I think all I can really do is carry on and hope that at least some of this gets through. Right, so apologies for all this, and thank you for your patience. You are a wonderful set of viewers, you really are. Have I told you that lately? You are wonderful. Thank you. Now, okay, let's make a start. So I'm going to start with Sandra, and Sandra sent through this photo here. And Sandra said, I would really appreciate your feedback on the attached photo and what you think of my processing. I attached the original, and here we go. Here's the, oh no, sorry, this is the edited version. And this is the original. So Sandra's wanting to know what I think of the processed version of the photo taken of my nephew just while we were in London just before Christmas. So nice and sparkly. There's a good clarity to this picture, I think, for sure. There's, your nephew's nicely in focus. All the lights behind have got that lovely bokeh spreading out kind of soft look to it. So there's a nice depth between the or separation between the foreground and background. In the foreground, your nephew's looking good. So in that sense, I think on a technical level of, getting the subject in focus and having a nice background really works. So spot on there, Sandra. So, but the next thing is what else you might have done. So if we click back here and we look at the original. So what we can see from the original is that mostly what you've done is you've filled in that top left corner and the bottom right, just kind of to just make sure that there's a kind of continuation, a constancy between in the background. Oh, sorry, come back to that one later. And the other thing you've done is a slight colour shift. So here there's more pink in the face, and here is a cooler blue. Now, that's a kind of an aesthetic choice. Personally, I actually think I prefer the little bit more colour in the face. I think that having that little bit of pink, reddish pink in there against the blue works quite well. So if you're doing the colour shifts, what you might do is do the colour shift but mask off the face a little bit and allow the slightly richer pinks to come through. And then they act as a kind of, the warmer skin tones are then acting as quite a nice contrast against the cooler bluish lights of the background. So something to consider there, I think, is when you look at this, I think if we kind of zoom in a bit, and so we're not worrying too much about the other bits, I think there's a nice kind of colour complement actually with that. The other thing I would suggest though is that really you've got a lot of background up here, and his eyes are sitting in the middle of the photo, kind of the middle line of the photo, and there's a lot of background without necessarily adding to the photo. Let's just open this with Photoshop for a moment. Because I think here, Sandra, there's the idea of how you might have cropped it differently. Generally speaking, I think when you are dealing with, sorry, I don't need that bit on my timeline, portraits, there's a sense of what you kind of want to be doing is, in an ideal world, so I didn't mean to do that, where are we? Yes, crop, that's what I mean. I think you want to kind of pull down a little bit. In fact, I'll tell you what, let's just do that. I suddenly realise I've done this with your unedited version. So let's open this with your edited version. And like I said, I think actually your crop really needs to be something a little bit more like this. It's about him, and when we've got all this, we kind of get distracted by a lot of background up here. Now, the alternative to this, I mean, I still need to think you need to come down a bit more, is to maybe give him a little bit more around. So if we were to sort of pull that down, but maybe nudge this out a bit, perhaps if you were making this more of a kind of square, something like that, and let's just do a content aware and see what that actually gives us. Then, now, obviously then this is doing sort of funny things with the shoulder. In an ideal world, you know, these lights are kind of continuing down here a bit. So, you know, the shoulders are just kind of looking, you know, slightly more natural and what have you. But, and also those lights have kind of gone a bit funny. But that kind of thing, I think, actually gives you a sort of slightly better kind of shape to it. Maybe even slightly closer in, something like that, perhaps might work. I think if we go back to your original, like I say, I do get slightly concerned by the fact that, because really this picture is about your nephew, right? Eyes are beautifully in sharp focus. It's a great photo of him. He's looking good. Lovely expression on his face. This is what it's about. The background is a supporting role. It's in a supporting role to the main feature. Your nephew here is the main feature. So the background, you only need enough of the background in order to support the tale you're telling. And the tale you're telling is of your nephew against this background. So when we kind of come out full, you've got more background than is actually needed. So whether you decide to make it square or whether you just decide to actually, you can still keep it in a portrait thing and even just, you know, crop it in a little bit like that. If you like the portrait format, I think something, and again, that still feels possibly too much to me. Something like that, and actually allow your nephew's eyes to be more, slightly more rule of thirds, slightly more kind of off center. I think overall that kind of sits as a slightly better composition. But like I say, really for me then, the key bit to this is that idea of the composition, just kind of how much background you actually need. You need enough background to be able to tell the story, that, you know, to enhance the fact that this is a kind of pre-Christmas scene, or it's a nightclub scene, or there's that kind of light manipulation. But you don't necessarily need to have so much of the background unless the background is playing a bigger part, in which case you might be wanting to see trees that are lit up, and a street scene or a building scene or an internal with other, whatever, wherever else this happened to be taken. You're wanting to get a much bigger sense of the space that he's in. So in that sense, we're back to the old problem, either closer in or further out. But in this case, I think everything's, you know, it's a lovely photo of your nephew. You only need as much background to add to the narrative without kind of starting to detract from it. So, hope that makes sense to you, Sandra. But thank you for sending that one in. Right, okay, where are we? So, Meg says, oh, okay, so April has said, I'm still here and I'm good, and Meg said she is too. So Maggie says, you look okay just now. Okay, good, right. So things seem to be working from that end. Mr. Mackey says, Ewan McClure is such a good painter. Holy moly, happy with how it turned out. Okay, that's referring to, if you've seen my Facebook or Instagram post of late, one of the things that I've currently got going on is there's a portrait artist called Ewan McClure, who I've known for a little while, and he's painting my portrait, and which is a really, really interesting experience. And it's a totally, having some wonderful conversations with Ewan about the difference between photographing a portrait and painting a portrait, and the whole notion of how long it takes, that you can take a photograph within a fraction of a second, but to do a painting can take many hours. And the knock-on effect of that is huge. So there's a whole kind of story behind that, and I think at some point I might write a blog post about it. But if you are happening to follow me on other social media, whether it's on Facebook or it's on Instagram, you can see the sitting that I was doing with him on Friday, where he's blocking in the main sort of chunks of colour. I'm actually going back to sit with him tomorrow, where he's going to be filling in some of the detail. It's an absolutely fascinating process. Where are we at? So, okay, Sandra says she's not experiencing any buffering. That's good, because my little screen here keeps showing me buffering, which is worrying me a little bit. April says the crop looks good and I like the blue. Sandra says, thank you, Kim. That was really helpful to get someone else's perspective. John says, really good portrait, like the background. April says, well, I've got to check it out. I guess that's about the portrait. And Robert says, can't wait to see the portrait. Perhaps you should interview him on your podcast. Contrast painting versus photography composition. Yeah, it's a good point. I keep thinking about the idea of doing interviews. I think the problem is I can't do live interviews, especially when I've got problems with buffering and enough. Because if I'm interviewing somebody live and I've got their stream coming through my system, and then I've got to take both streams kind of back up into doing live, it's not going to work. The only way that might work is to do recorded interview. And there's plenty of other photographers that I know that I keep thinking about. This could be something to do, interviewing other photographers, but I still haven't fully worked out a way of doing it to tie it in, particularly directly with the podcast. However, watch this space. It will happen sooner or later, I think. And Sandra says, thank you for your feedback. Okay, excellent. Right, so let's move on then. So next I'm going to talk about Robert. So where are we? Done that. And Robert sent us this photo and says, I entered this into the Dallas Camera Club contest and it did not do well. I'm not surprised I don't think it pops, so to say. I know the cow is pointing to the right, and maybe there should be some more room on that side. But I think here that because he's looking at me towards the left, so I cropped the photo to reflect that. The cow lives at someone's house in Tennessee. He's quite friendly, like a dog. I wanted to take him home. I was quite hoping that you could help me make this photo stand out more than my original edit. Colour's okay, but I thought that the black and white would be better due to subdued tones and rainy weather. Let me know your thoughts. Okay, well, I mean, that's really interesting, the idea that there's a cow. Actually, as Ed pointed out on the Facebook group, you're saying cow and then you're saying he. So is this a young bull or heifer? Or is it, if it's a cow, then it would be a she. Anyway, I'm not going to worry too much about that for the moment. You can find that one out at a later date. However, I think, yes, kind of fun here, the idea that someone's actually keeping a cow as a pet, more like a dog, and is in and out of the house. So, kind of, yeah, fascinating story behind that. Back to the idea then of the edit. Now, the first thing that strikes me about this edit as well is the fact that it is dark. There's not a lot of tonal range here. Everything seems to be sitting in the darker ends. Now, if I open this in Photoshop, and this is just the very, very first impressions, we can go on and do other things. But if I go to the levels, here we can see down here, there's a gap. There's a gap between, we go from this histogram here is showing us the tonal range. And so there's not a lot, there's little bits in the kind of black end, not a lot. Most of it's in the kind of above the halfway mark, or which really means most of it's in the darker half. And as we move towards the lights, it gets lesser and then it stops abruptly right here. And what that means is that there's a whole chunk of light here, a range that you are not using. Now, this might be because your monitor, an awful lot of computer monitors, have an extra level of brightness put in them to make pictures and movies pop that little bit more. But it has a problem. It is problematic when you come to editing your photos, because you think your photos are brighter than they actually are. So because the screen is showing them brighter, you think that's bright enough. And so maybe you don't kind of do any more levels of adjustments. So it's always worth, whenever you've finished, and because we've had this problem before, Robert, I know, I think, in fact, funny feeling, it was even last week or the week before, I grabbed the level slider and shoved it to the left a bit, and instantly the image looked a little bit more engaging. Yes, it was the one with the two people sitting on the pavement, which I really loved the composition of, but there was a problem with the dynamic range here. So if I just take this here and I nudge that up to the left, can you instantly see that in itself just makes a bit of a difference, makes it stand out a little bit more. Now, even here where we've started hitting the light is really up there. So the way you've edited the cow is quite kind of, I'm guessing you've darkened the highlights a lot. So there's more light that could come into the cow. So you could even bring it up to here before we start losing detail in the back. Now, if I was to then take that as levels but I don't want everything else lit up. So let's use the mask and get rid of all that, and then just paint back in essentially the cow, make it a little bit lighter in places. Now that's too bright up there, and this is kind of standing out a bit too much. But if I just do that, now this, like I said, it's a very kind of quick edit. Let's put that to 50% and just kind of darken some of these bits down so that something like that, and play around a little bit, swap back and forth, do it 30%, 50%, just kind of brighten bits in, darken bits down, something like that. And now what's happened is you've got more of a separation between the cow and the background. Now, like I said, we've got to be careful here that we're not ending up with a really sort of strong line. This is a very quick edit. Now, the other thing with this edit is the fact that I do think that the cow sits too far to the right. The eye might be looking left and back at the photographer, but because the whole body is pointing this way, it feels like there's a lot of room to the left and not a lot of room to the right. So what I would suggest at this point, let me find your picture again, because Robert's fortunately sent me through the raw file, and so we can see what the original looked like. Now, interestingly, now we see that the cow is white rather than, say, brown or beige, slightly dirty white. We can also see that it's a very dull day, but in a way the cow stands out much more against the background, because the background here is greenish grass. Now, it is a dull day, and there's no doubt that the photo would work better if you managed to get the light right. And I think there's a kind of interesting thing that goes on with our photography here, worth making a point of for the moment, which is there's different levels of photography we're going for. We all, of course, want to be able to get the award-winning photo, the photo that scores top of the competition we've entered it for, gets the maximum number of likes, wows, comments, praise, whatever it is we're chasing. Those kind of photos come very, very few and far between. Not every photo we ever create is going to be a winner at the top of the pile. You can't have every photo as number one. But there is a thing. If you think about, like, say, on a site like Photo Crowd, what's interesting when you go for the competition, there's the winner, but they also make a note of the top 10. And then they make a note of the top 10%, the top 25%, and the top 50%. And so there's a level whereby what we're trying to do is see if we can take a photo that might naturally be in one of those groupings and shift it up to the next grouping. So can we get a photo that wouldn't be in the top 50% into the top 50%? Can we get a photo that we took that maybe wasn't ideal but would have been in the top 50? Can we get into the top 25? Can we get a top 25 photo into a top 10%? Can we get a top 10% into a top 10? So this is really where your editing is coming in. You are trying to take the photo, and within the camera you're trying to take the best photo you possibly can. Because the better the photo you've got, the more options you have to edit afterwards. And when we come to a photo like this, we're then talking about editing options. I mean, I can open this photo and, you know, the part of the problem is it's a dull day. Can I add? Can I change this? Well, actually, there's elements where I can a bit. So supposing then I decide to, let's add another layer here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a gradient map here. And so now let's just go back to there. So, and what I'm going to do with the gradient, let's double click on this. So we've got a gradient here. Now, when we, back to here. Okay, what I'm going to do then is the gradient. So if we take this gradient tool, and what I first of all do here, click, is the color I'm going to pick first of all. Let's get a kind of like a nice bright, actually go for a kind of pale yellow, maybe not that yellow, something like that. So supposing we were trying to recreate a kind of sunlight burst. So I might have a pale yellow, and then in the middle I'm going to have another color. No, not that one. Can I undo that? Cancel that. That's what I want. I want to create a second color, and maybe I'll go for a sort of slightly deeper orange, something like that, and then I'm fading it out to 0. Now I've got that, I might decide to do, now if I was to do a normal gradient, that would look like that. What I'm going to do, I'm going to do a radial gradient, and I'm going to stretch out like that. So now you've kind of got a bit of a sunburst, and if I change the interaction with that, maybe take it to screen or something like that, sort of slightly warm colors in there. I could go back to the background. Let's just duplicate that layer. I might decide to burn the shadows. Or actually, I'll tell you what I could do here. Let's straightforwardly take a paintbrush and paint. Let's put that back to 100%, and say paint a shadow in here, something like that. Okay, now not going to be absolutely perfect at the moment, but let's say we had a shadow coming off the cow. Now that obviously looks pretty awful, but again, what I do is I change that to darken, multiply, and then take the opacity down, something like that. And you know, now this is very quick. You would obviously take much more time, but when you do something like that, now we have something which kind of looks like there's a bit of sun behind the cow. Now you can go in and you can do all sorts of highlights and play around. However, it's a cartoon sunset behind the cow. Really, if you saw a real cow being photographed like that, you know, under real lighting conditions, it would look a lot better. So your best option really is to try and get, but you haven't got that. So now what you decided to do was you decided to go black and white. So let's go back to here, and let's take this into Camera Raw, and we then run into all these problems of black and white again. Now, if you're desaturating, and then what you're doing is you're taking that's not the shadows down, you're taking the highlights down because you're trying to get more detail out of there, you're bringing the shadows up, you're then playing with the texture, you're playing with the clarity, and we end up with something like this. And it's now very busy, it's very textured, but it's not just the cow that has been had stronger contrast in, but all the background has as well. So again, you kind of want to be thinking about selectively doing this, but we've also sort of lost a lot here. So there's a kind of tricky thing here about where you're wanting to go. And So maybe something like this, you're better off going to, if we do the black and white here, take the greens and greens, yellows. Yeah, take the yellows and you kind of darken the grass down, because really what you're looking for is separation between the object and the background. And if we darken down those yellows, we're darkening down a bit of this as well, but it's creating more contrast between the cow and the background. So the cow stands out that little bit more. Red, now in the reds we've got a little bit more. Now some of that's also bringing the grass up, and that's because of the yellows, but we're getting a little bit more contrast in the, a little bit lighter on the cow as well. Do that a bit, and you can see we've got something there which is maybe starting to make it stand out a little bit more. Other options we could do, again, if we wanted to take something like the curves, drop the curves down, but not completely. So let's go back to the paint bucket, fill that, and then just, we'll put that at 50% or something, 60% there, and just use it to sort of darken the sky a little bit, so the sky isn't detracting too much, or maybe just kind of pull down the corners a little bit, something like that. But we're still back at this point whereby overall everything's a little bit too dark. So then what perhaps we might want to do is to just go into the levels check. We find that again, we could probably bring that up a little bit, and then just within the levels, swap that round to a black, take that down a little bit, just touch the cow, darken down the cow a little. So yeah, this is these kind of things that you really need to do, Robert. That really what we're talking about is when you go back to your original picture here, that there's not a lot of dynamic range, and that the cow doesn't stand out enough against the background. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that the cow is distinctive from the background. And so when you come to editing, you need to be thinking, what are the different things that are going to make it stand out? Because actually when you look at the original color version, it stands out more because we've got the white against the green. As soon as you go black and white, we kind of lost some of that. So do you see what I mean? Hopefully then, Robert, that makes a little bit of sense. As for the crop, let's just go back to the crop, and let's just go back to the original for this one. If you talk about the original here, now you kind of cropped in from the side, a little bit like that, and it feels like then there's a whole pile of space over here. I think you either maybe, you see, if you crop in from the left a little bit, we don't need really all this behind there. Don't need a lot there either. In which case, again, kind of start thinking about a square crop. And if I kind of bring that round to roughly about there, and you know what? I think there's something quite nice about a square crop. Is all the cow almost becomes a kind of heart shape into the middle of this square then. And at that point, if we wanted to go back to doing our black and white shifts and colorations and all this kind of stuff, sorry, if I select all, copy, paste, and then you could, if we drop that back into Camera Raw, we can give it a little bit of vignette around the edge, like that. But again, we are at a point here whereby it's quite dark, so we can lighten that up, but then take those highlights down a little bit so we don't completely lose all the texture. And we end up with something like that. And, you know, you're kind of there, I think. It gives you a few more options anyway. So bearing in mind the shape of the cow, I think that what we've got is this kind of, I need to enlarge that, but this kind of almost heart-shaped cow fits quite nicely into a square shape rather than having a lot of space behind it. So hope there's enough ideas in there for you, Robert, to sort of just get in and play around. But the main thing to remember is, and I think it's like I say, given especially that it was one of these things that we were talking about last week as well, and I know it has cropped up before, which is this notion of the dynamic range. You're wanting to be able to fill your photo with the full range of tones, unless you are specifically shooting high key or low key. Generally speaking, even then, you want to be able to get your lights either up to the complete white or very close to the white, and you want to get your darks down to the complete near to the end black, and then that way you have a kind of enough of a dynamic range to be able to so that it feels like you're using everything you've got, and the picture feels fuller. When you've got half that range missing, the whole image is just going to feel flatter. So I hope that makes sense there, Robert. Now, okay, where are we? Robert said, I think a recorded interview would work great. April says, cute little guy. Mr. Mackey says, wow, great photo. Rosemary says, this cow has so much personality, very cute. April says, this is interesting about the computer lighting. A little bit of fun with that. Sandra says, I know what you mean about computer screens showing photos lighter than they actually are, and I have to remember to lighten photos when I get them printed for calendars. And it's a very good point that, generally speaking, it's like, I mean, I have my monitor has been calibrated so that what I see on the monitor is, in terms of especially light and dark, but also color range, is as close to natural as you can get, given the fact that the monitor is backlit, and so it will never be quite the same as reflected light. But even then, if I'm getting stuff printed for magazines, I've noticed that the magazines tend to print darker, and so I have to lighten them a little bit more, maybe sharpen them slightly more when I send them for print. So I will have quite often two different versions of the photo. There'll be my version of the photo, and then there'll be a print version of the photo if it's going for print, or a computer version of the photo if it's just to be viewed online. Meg says the cow is so cute, a very good photo, Robert. Robert says, thank you for your feedback, the contrast makes perfect sense. I also like the crop heart shape, glad you saw that. John says, when the cow stands out from the background, it looks better. Great tip, Kim. VG says, good evening, everyone. Hello, VG. Glad you could make it along. Sorry, joining late, just came home. Robert says, next version will be called the heart-shaped cow or bull. April says, Kim, now you've got to show 3 pictures of yourself, a low key, a high key, and a monochrome colour. Oh, a picture of mine, right? This is a picture of yours. At some point, not today. I don't have it all lined up. But I tell you what, April, if you've got an idea of something you really put it into the Facebook group and remind me of, if you've got an idea, and this is true for anybody, not just April, but if you have an idea, something you would like to see in these podcasts. Now, there's obviously submit your photos. Chunk of this, is about giving you feedback on your imagery. But another aspect of this is to be able to answer questions. This podcast is called Understanding Photography. At the moment, I'm mostly focusing on giving you feedback on the photography that you submit to me, because I feel that really gives you a lot of benefit to learning where you are with your photography and sticking points you've got to overcome. However, there are other aspects. If there's a specific editing term, if there's a specific technique you would like to see, or if you just like to see what my approach is to something, or aspects of narrative, or anything related to photography, you can ask questions. Be as full as you can about the question, and then I will do my best to answer. So if you've got suggestions, then if you're on Facebook, there's a Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, put it into that. Or if you want to email me directly, then kim@kimayres.co.uk is the place to do it. And of course, the other thing is, if you want to support these podcasts, if you find them useful, entertaining, or any of the other, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. While we're looking over on this side of it, lots of social media and ways to support me. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. Sandra says, how do you calibrate your monitor? Well, you either go and get somebody who's got one of these, or you borrow one of these, or there is... sorry, actually, this is so... I just hope I don't pull out a microphone or anything like that. But basically, you can get something like this. This one's called Color Checker. And you... there are a whole bunch of... and what you do is you hang them over your monitor, and then you have a bit of software, and it goes through and it readjusts your monitor for you. So... you could basically, you buy a device, or you find somebody who's already got one of these devices and you borrow it, or maybe you know somebody who can come and do it for a few pounds or dollars or whatever to do it for you, get your monitor calibrated. If you're going to be doing a lot of printing up stuff, then it's well worth doing. Right, okay, let's move on. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to Anne. So Anne in Texas says, well, where are we? Right, okay, here's an image I took in Strasbourg, France in July. So let's take a little look here at Anne's photo. Any suggestions on cropping to get a better story? Between the architecture and the people, I think there may be too much going on. Also, any suggestions for editing the light and shadows? The shadow at the bottom is distracting. I tried various things to make it less prominent, but didn't have much success. Okay, so what we've got here then is Anne's got this photo taken in Strasbourg, and what we've got is we've got 4 young men kneeling down in front of this religious building and statue. I'm guessing that's probably the Madonna and Child sitting here. So, yeah, and there's a lot, and probably a whole bunch of disciples and saints and holy religious people and all sorts of incredible carvings. This place here. And so, by the look of the editing, what Anne has been doing here is trying to make the lads stand out a little bit more. And we can see that sunlight is shining directly on here, but there's a lot of, this has been darkened down an awful lot. It's like it's a very, very heavy vignette, and it also looks like you've darkened down the highlights a lot on here. So, fortunately, Anne has sent us in the raw file. So, let's take a look at what the original looks like. And so this is the original. It's fairly dull. The lighting isn't. It's got a bit too well. We can see f13 320th of a second hasn't let quite enough light in. Again, if you look up, up here at the histogram, there's a large gap here where it's the light part isn't being used. Exactly the same problem that we were talking about with Robert just now. So if I just open that as it is, if I was to go to the levels, grab that, you can see this great big patch over here, grab that and drag that to the left, we immediately brighten it up. And in fact, actually, it gets up to about here before we start really reaching where most of it's happening. So this tiny little line here will be some highlight just kicking about, which is just blowing out slightly. Now, that immediately brightens up the building beautifully, except for the fact that this shadow is still quite on. We're not really getting quite so much of the people that are in it. And this is this is the basic problem that Anne's been up against. Now, what I will also say is that a lot of the editing that Anne's already done has been pretty good. We can see what's happened is she's not only straightened it, she's taken out the edges and straightened, done more in the way of sort of straightening the pillars so that you're not getting that kind of bit where it sort of triangulates out because of the wide angle and what have you. Also, she's kind of darkened down bits and pieces. So let's just I'll tell you what, let's do. And what she has also done, there's little bits of rubbish kicking about as well, which have been carefully removed. Good idea. There's no point in having that and distracting. So let's just very quickly here. What we'll do is just do a quick edit. So we drag this in here, pull that up, pull that down. I think Anne's gone for a little bit more, just a bit of the bike in, something like that, keeping these people in that kind of rule of, third of the way across. So we've got something like that. So I'll just enter that, and then if I Control J, so I've got another one here, or rather Control T, that's what I wanted to do, and I click and I drag that across, and I drag this across. This is a trick you've seen me do a few times before, but actually I don't need to take that one so much. We've got that as being fairly straight. In fact, actually, tell you what, before we do that, the whole thing's tilted a fraction. I'm just going to tilt that slightly that way, and then I will do the straightening, and we'll just straighten that a little bit out a little bit, and maybe that bit out a little bit. But what we do need to make sure, I think, is that the central one with the mother and child on the thing is the straight column. That's the bit that's anchoring us, because that's the one that these guys are looking at. So if we're not sure where we're allowed to have a tilt, anchor it to this one. So let's move in a little bit so we can see a little bit more what's going on. Now, so what we have then is we have this photo, which is an interesting photo, but if we were in a photo sharing site where people are moving at high speed, you're not going to pick out the subtleties. The real story here is the 4 lads in prayer or contemplation. So how do we get them to stand out when they're largely in shadow and there's a lot of brightness here? Now, let's select all, copy paste. Not there, there. Sorry. Right, we're going to go with this. What all I've done here is I've kind of essentially merged the levels with that. Let's then open this in Camera Raw Filter, and the highlights are very strong, and we can take those highlights down a little bit so that, but we've got to be careful here that we don't actually lose the sunshine. Now what we can also do is we can bring the shadows up, and if I bring those shadows up, this is starting to kind of stop these people getting quite so lost. Now we can then also maybe use the clarity tool, create a little bit more contrast, something like that. So let's just take a look at that, and we can see then that we've gone from hard shadows to, we've kind of lightened up this little bit a little bit more. So that's a good start. Maybe we can lighten this up a bit more. So if I take another, and what I do is, let's go back to Camera Raw Filter, and what I'm going to do is I'm only going to raise up the shadows. So I'm going to boost the shadows up here so that we're getting more out of there. Okay, but problem is we're then losing it in the top, so we mask it. So I mask that, and then I paint back in. So swap that round, and we just paint that back. Let's take that back up to 100%. So because we've brought the shadows up, I can do that, and now we've got this foreground even lighter, and I think when we've got that, we're definitely kind of onto something here. So we've immediately managed to make these a little bit lighter compared to the background. Maybe I've kind of overdone perhaps here. Actually, I'm thinking let's just go for a little bit of brightness contrast here. I just want to kind of create a little bit more contrast, or wanting a bit more richness coming out of there. Having done that though, we've brought more shadow back in here, so actually I will just mask out some of that extra shadow. And I think once we get to here, by the more we want to kind of, you bring up the shadows, and we're that's allowing these people to stand out a little bit more. So if we compare that then to your one here, we can see there's a lot of dark contrast here. It looks like you've kind of lightened this, but it sort of feels slightly false, and it's a bit difficult where the sun is falling. Here we've got a sort of slightly more even spread, so it's maybe working. There is another option, and now to a certain extent we're kind of limited. It's back to this problem of, in an ideal situation, you would have got them when the sun was just fractionally higher in the sky, they were all lit by the sunlight, the shadow of the building behind you wasn't starting to cover their bodies. There is another little trick though that perhaps you could use to try and make, if you're wanting to draw attention to the fact that these boys are in front of this, and that's to actually play around with the idea of a colour shift. And so what I mean, if we think about the fact, let's talk about red. One of the things we talked about red before now is red is one of those colours that instantly draws the eye. So these guys are all in blue. Now the blue does contrast with the red sandstone of the building, but because they're kind of in the shadow, they're not standing out as much as you're wanting them to stand out. What if we were to say turn their t-shirt, they're all wearing blue shirts, what if we were to turn their shirts red? That could be a possibility. And with that, in Photoshop, we go to the hue saturation. And if I, instead of the master, if I select the blues and I move this, then what we can see is I can kind of do a colour. Now that's kind of taking it purple, that's sort of getting red, and then maybe boost the saturation, lightness. Actually I'm not totally sure whether it's the blues. Let me just check what the cyans are doing for a moment. Sometimes I'm always getting slightly better out of, and that's gone to green. I do need to be at that end. Okay, between the cyans and blues, and in fact actually that's what we should do. Let's just go back to the science. One of the things I keep forgetting is down here, we can do is we can change the range. So I can grab that and pull that up a little bit and make sure that we're including all the bits we want. Take that saturation down, take that back down till we've got a red that we quite like. So I'm going to sort of stop somewhere around there. Now, the problem is with this red, included in the cyan, the colour range that we've got here has ended up being the doors and this shadow, which had a blue tint to it. So what we need to do is, just like we are with all the other masking, I'm going to use the black brush here to make sure the door goes back to its original colour and the paving goes back to its original colour. Now I'm going to narrow this down a little bit and we get their jeans and trousers back to their original colour. Now at this point what we're talking about is then coming in close and then just making sure that we can make sure that the shirt is painted red where we wanted it, but the jeans are back to the blue. So you then need to kind of go around and kind of make sure that it's all in the right place. The other thing I didn't do here was do a noise reduction, but that's because we're just doing this quickly. So just to kind of touch up, and where are we? Come over to here and take that back to the kind of natural colours that you would have had here. Now when we look at this, and this is the point that I was really coming to, is that when we look at this picture now, these boys stand out. We can see this, but our eye gets instantly drawn down to the lads kneeling down in front of it. Now when we're in blue, we see the scene and we get there. We get there eventually. But when they're red, we get there straight away. And that's kind of the key point that I'm wanting to make here, Anne, is again, depending on where you're placing this. Now, I think if this was a printed out photo and it was sitting in an exhibition, I think the red would be too garish. I think the blue is the natural way to go. But that's because people would take the time to look at it. And you need to have that extra second or two for it to register. And once it's registered, then that's great, it works. But if you were to put this one into an online site, you need to grab people's attention straight away. You're not given that extra couple of seconds for people's eyes to wander over. They instantly take it in and then they scroll to the next picture. So if you're going to get them to pause, a red will grab the attention that little bit faster. So once again, I think the key element with this, like the key element with Robert, and one of the things I was saying earlier, is it's about what we've got is how do you separate, how do you draw the eye to the part you want, and how do you make sure that that is separate from the background so that it's not just blending into it. And we have a whole range of tools to us. We have light and dark, we have in focus and out of focus, and then of course we also use leading lines, all this kind of stuff to draw our eye where we want to go. In this case, you couldn't get the background out of focus. You didn't have another option for leading lines. So your other option here is that notion of colour. And that colour helps it pop. But on top of that as well is the fact of actually looking for ways to reduce that shadow. And I think just going into Camera Raw and bringing up the shadows slider to bring in more light, maybe doing it 2 or 3 times, but then masking it out so it's only affecting that shadow at the bottom and not affecting the whole piece. Then I think that probably, hopefully, gives you ideas to play with. So that's pretty much it. I wonder what kind of conversations here. What have we got here? Peter says hi. That's hi to VG. April says architecture is gorgeous. VG says beautiful carving. Sandra says great capture of the men kneeling. April says great difference. Anne says the shadow is so much less distracting, so much better. VG says beautiful edit. The men are now visible and the shadow and the light are balanced. April says I like the colour transformation of the clothes. And Robert says great advice about the colour change, thank you. VG also says great tip, thank you. And and Anne says wow, colour shifter really works to grab the attention. And that's it. It's about understanding what we talked before about red. Red is the one that where the eye just goes, oh, red, bam. You notice red before you notice any other colour. And so that's where you've got to be careful with it. And when we did a podcast purely devoted to red, and I think we did a contest, or challenge rather, purely devoted to red, and what we talked about was the problem of overdoing the red, and that quite often red will take your attention where you don't want it. This is a case of where you actually use red to take the eye exactly where you do want it. Rosemary says the edit really does draw your eye. Beautiful scene, tells a wonderful story. So thank you very much for sending that one in, and thank you to Robert and to Sandra for their images too. So next week we are get your images in, okay? And please, for my sake, try and get them in a little bit earlier. I keep getting to this point whereby I'm getting to Friday and nobody sent me anything, and I start to panic, thinking we're not going to have a podcast because nobody's sending anything in. This really is a major opportunity for you to be able to improve your understanding of photography. I have loads of knowledge which I'm more than happy to impart to you, but you need to ask me questions. You need to send me your photos. Tell me what you're struggling with, and I can help you. So make sure you do that. Or, like I say, if you have questions, if you have ideas, put them to me. This podcast is here for you, and I don't charge money for it. We have our group; it's fun, but I can't operate on my own. Otherwise, it just becomes a lecture. I get up and I just say things which you may or may not be interested in. The whole idea behind these podcasts is to make it personal. This podcast is for you. You watching me right now, it's for you. So to make the most of it, send me your images, send me your suggestions, tell me how I can best help your photography to grow and advance. Okay? Because that's what I enjoy doing. It makes I feel better for having done that. Okay? Right, so where are we? I cast a couple of Anne says using colour to draw the eye is a great idea, thanks. So that's us. Thank you ever so much to everybody. And where am I going to do? I'm going to go over and do that bit. If you feel these podcasts are useful, entertaining, you would like to support them in some way, buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. In the meantime, send me your images for next week. Send me your questions for next week, and I will see you all next Sunday for episode 142 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres.